you know, um, again, when we're looking at government and looking at things, it isn't about earthly government. It isn't about recognition on earth. It's not about big ministries and all that. It's just about being called and knowing you're called for a responsibility for an area or a region, and then seeing that responsibility outworked and grow. So to establish governmental authority and benches in places that know, some people then will know they're called to a wider sphere across a parallel or across a up a longitude, or that type of thing. That's what I see in terms of the patterns that are starting to emerge. I've hooked up with another couple who have established benches recently up in the northwest area, looking to help support them. And and I know several others are looking to engage that. And with one of the groups, I'm looking to introduce someone from one end of the country to the other so that they can begin to connect. So it's really just looking to establish relationship and then seeing how that relationship evolves, and how then people are able to get a blueprint and establish that so that they can see the government of God working out in these areas, and ultimately call forth for the cities of refuge, and begin to administrate those, and to see the ancient wells unblocked and see new wells dug. And I just think we're in this season where there's so much governmentally that's going on, that I'm starting to see, and I particularly in engaging with the chancellors' houses. I think I'm up to number 10 now of the chancellors' houses, so I've been in 10 of them out of the 12, and I've got a little bit more insight now than I did, although still not a lot, because I'm still needing wisdom to engage me there, but they will be places that I've seen such depth in them. We think that what we're doing here in our town or our city or our region, it's like these things go into transdimensional government. I mean, and where as sons we are called to be, we will be operating in totally different dimensions. I mean, Paul said, God is able to do exceedingly abundantly beyond what we can even imagine or think. And some of what I've seen in these things has just expanded my understanding, and just wow, there is, we're just at the beginning. And when we take our sphere of government back, in terms of whether it's my life or my town or my city or this planet, that's just the beginning. Once the earth gets back into its original position of being in the center of God's purposes, then all the other dimensions and the expansion of the kingdom, and that will then begin to outwork. But we have to understand the protocols of doing it. So looking at these houses has been really fascinating to see some of the things of how people will be commissioned, how their scrolls will be released, how they will begin then to establish the culture, not just for a town, but the culture for a galaxy, or all sorts of other things that I'm seeing. So, but it's interesting. But it really comes down to, for me, I have to take the government of my life, and I have to be ruling. I have to be on my mountain. I have to be outworking my destiny, and then my destiny will cause me to interact and connect with other people who also have destinies that are aligned, that then we can form relationship, we can form benches, we can get blueprints, and those will form all over the world. There are connections in the kingdom, which are just this matrix of interactions and relational connections that God is making with people who are willing to embrace their heavenly destiny, so that we can start to see things really change. But we're seeing that call go out. I find it really interesting that people are responding to that. Some of the calls that I've been making, some of this colors I've been sending out, it's been great. People have contacted me saying that they've been seeing blue lights and different things around them, and I'm sort of like, okay, this is awesome, because when you do something like sending out a blue frequency of light with a sound that's calling people into their governmental positions, you sort of like just do it. You don't sort of like, well, how is that going to work? What's going to happen? You just do it, and I did it, and I've had quite a number of people just contact me to say that these lights have been around them and they've engaged a light. Some blue orb of light appeared in someone's room, and I mean, it's just like, I think, wow, God is doing it. And loads of people have contacted me about connecting, and I think those things are significant because I think that's what God's doing. He's establishing the relational connections in the kingdom that can become governmental as we go forward. So I've always got my eye open for governmental things when I start to see them emerge. So anyway, there we go. Yeah. All right. So, we got anything particularly you want to do today?
Well, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, hey, Joe.
Yeah. Hi, Joe.
Morning. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Well, yeah. You speak about the government thing and all of that. We've been feeling mandated to send out that sound. In fact, what we got last time we engaged, we got this little, like on a hotel desk when you walk up and you have that little dinger thing and you go ding, and we actually heard the sound and felt like we were, and of course that matches with our blueprint to send the sound out, and we did like you're doing with your blue lights. We were ringing our little ringer like ding, sending out that sound to for those that are feeling to be a part. And yeah, now it seems to be slow going on our end, and I wanted to ask you about that, like in setting up the benches and getting benches going. Have you gotten any more on good protocol on setting those up and getting people established in that, or sending out? Well, we're sending out the call, but like any more that you could share on that? I know you've shared a ton, but we're in progressive revelation, and you're doing it a lot more now, and just wondering if you had any good insight on that, Mike.
Okay. Yeah. I think what we must be careful is not to be concerned about numbers or speed, because it's not about how fast things go or how many numbers there are. It's having the blueprint. And I know when we got together and you saw the blueprint, one of the things we saw was a pebble going out, almost like a ripple effect going out from this tower. I think we saw it, and it's like, and that's really what you've got to be looking at. There are circles that go out, and those circles get larger as they go out, in a sense, go out. So you start with a blueprint that gives you the first circle, and then you form this bench around the blueprint. And so that's the first point. And to be honest, it's like I'm working with people who only have 3 people in blueprints, in government. They're not looking to establish anything bigger. At this point, they're just establishing the 3. They're making sure that they understand their governmental position, their blueprint, and then they will release for 7 as they're led to do that. So it's not, I don't think you have to be too concerned about it. You're doing what God's calling you to do, and that's the key. So long as you're obediently following, doing what it's up to Him. If He gives you a strategy, then employ that strategy. Just keep continuing to seek Him, engage with Him, and then just outwork what He's revealing to you to do. Once you've established a 3, then if you're going to be a physical location on the ground, then the next step is to establish the physical 7, the bench of 7, who will carry the blueprint, who will have the angel of the house as the interaction between the 3 and the 7, so that there is always an apostolic prophetic perspective to how the house is functioning, and how then the vision, the culture, the values that you are called to establish can be outworked in people. And I've worked with a group who did that with 10 people, and that's what they did. They got their blueprint, they established the relational connections to form their bench, and then they looked to see the 7 in relationship engage their blueprint. This is what's it's happening up in Maryland. They're taking it step by step, but they've built a strong relational base between people to ensure one heart, one mind, one purpose, that the people are gathered around the vision of the blueprint, so that we can work together and begin to discover the different roles within it. And once you've established that as a physical base, then you then look to establish your 7 mountains. Okay, who is called to be on the mountains? Now, for us, some of our mountains are occupied by some of our 7, because we haven't got that many people. It's like, you have people double up until they get more. So that was, the process. If you have a physical location, that's the way you would go, 3, 7, 7, and then eventually 12, once you've established sort of the ministry of, of government to the whole thing, But if you're not a physical location, then you would go 3, 7 mountains, because those are the governmental spheres, and then you call people, and those people, you see, you may not even be in the same region or town. They could be in completely different place, but are called to the blueprint, and that could be across a parallel, it could be a region, and no one might know what's going on there. It's purely something that's being done in the heavens, but people will experience the outworking of it as they legislate in the heavens. Things will change on the earth, and some people are beginning to do that. If you are in a physical location and you're looking at an ecclesia, a gathering of people around that, once you have to make sure you create a culture of honor. That's the key to establishing the relational strength of receiving each other, loving each other, accepting each other's gifts, helping each other to find our place. And the government obviously has to be, the reflection of heaven. So the bench of 3 is the foundation that releases others. So everything gets wider. So you start with 3, but then you go to 7, and then eventually you go to 12. But in a sense, that also goes into each mountain would have 3. So each mountain would have a 3, so there'd be 21 people on mountains. Then each mountain will have 7 mountains, so then there will be another 7, 1 on each of that mountain, and then another 3 on each. It just grows exponentially, but then that's what the kingdom does. It expands. If your blueprint only ever is to do with the 3 and the 7, then that's what you're doing. What you're doing expands in the spiritual dynamic of the outworking of the government of God in things which are spiritually part of God's blueprint. So some people's blueprints may be very much enlarged with creating something that provides a place for God to move, and people may not ever know that, but God knows, and heaven knows, and the people must need to be comfortable in knowing what they're called to do and what the blueprint says. Obviously for our blueprint, we have physical and outworking of our vision and values here on the ground, in our day center, in our houses, in our rehabilitation center. That reflects part of what we're doing also, because we're called to media, producing media, and and we have a wider sphere to equip, and that's what's growing and expanding at a much higher rate. I have more people in the alpha and beta groups than there are here in the church on the ground, but that doesn't matter, because it's not about numbers. The people who are here on the ground outwork their vision. They help me outwork mine, and what we're doing in terms of expanding and equipping people all over the world. They look to administer to people here. So we're in that place of where we are getting all our mountains equipped. So at the moment now we have 7 mountains. 5 of them have got 3 people on them. 2 of them have got 2. Well, a month ago, most of them only had 1 or 2. So people are they're releasing the sound. They're drawing people to their mountain. Then they're getting them together, and they're sharing. They're stepping in together, to heaven together. They're forming the relationships. That's how things are growing and developing. It just is continually something which expands, but at the rate that God wants. I mean, you could look at us as a church and say, well, you're not very successful. You've not got many people. You've been going a long time. If you look at it from just the natural standpoint, you'd think, oh, well, this is not really very effective. But when you look at the spiritual standpoint and you look at our impact into the community, you see a whole different measure. The number of people that we're engaging in, we're engaging with thousands of people a year who we're feeding, we're clothing, we're helping, we're supporting, we're ministering to, we're getting them houses, jobs. There's a outworking of something which is, I'd rather have 50 people in the church and touch 1,000 people than have 1,000 people in the church and touch 50. Because I think Ian Clayton says, do you want a river which is a mile wide and an inch deep, or do you want it an inch wide and a mile deep? Well, I'd rather have it an inch wide and a mile deep. Because there are then dimensions you can engage in. So it's not really about the numbers. So I would encourage you, just keep pursuing, engage, do what God says, keep issuing the sounds, sending your angels out, just keep on. But while you're at this place, just make sure you really establish the relationships. Make sure you establish that culture of honor. You develop openness and honesty and transparency, where everything is dealing with the problem, not the person. We deal with the issue so that we can maintain relationship and establish that to go forward. And that means we have to talk to each other, and it's easy to do that with a few people. Because you then you have a model, you have a prototype of something which then can be replicated and will grow. Because it is, once you have one thing, the next thing just looks like it, only it's bigger or smaller. That's the whole fractal nature of the kingdom. But it's better to spend the time establishing the prototype and making sure the prototype is really robust. That's why we've gone through so many difficulties, because we've had to change something and bring something in with people who don't understand, and then try and help them understand, and then when they do understand, then they fall out, and then this happens and that happens, and and we did that without all the knowledge that we've got now of how to set up watchmen and how to deal with the guard posts, and how to deal with the court system and how to remove legal rights. So we've had to battle through, but we're now getting there. And from one standpoint, we've got a long way to go, but from another, we've made a lot of progress. And you have to have patience. I've had to learn great patience. Because when you see things so far ahead, it's so easy to get that far ahead, and then, well, why aren't people where they should be? So you have to continually have the angel of the house type ministry that makes sure you're not leaving people behind, you're not racing ahead for the wrong reasons, but you're going at the right pace, and people are following. If you can be a leader, but if you're 1,000 miles ahead of them, they won't be able to see you to follow. So you have to make sure that you are in touch with things, and you help the bench to be in touch, and then you help the mountains to be in touch, not just with what's going on here, but then also to be in touch the fact that we are reaching out, and we have also responsibility for a wider sphere which we have to begin to administer, and that's just something which will develop. And therefore you have to let each of the mountains and each of the area establish how they do things from their own blueprint. As a bench of 3, we have a blueprint which is for the overall how things are and what God has called us to do. When it comes to the seven, they're responsible for outworking the vision and values of that, but they have to find their own way of doing it because they are different redemptive gifts, they have different characteristics, they have different abilities. The key function is to make sure that they still act governmentally, even though they may have a more priestly function. Because if you don't act governmentally, then you just go back to old patterns rather than new ones. And so it's ensuring that they know their authority, that they can exercise their heavenly authority to get things done. They don't just go round and round in circles talking about people's problems and issues and try and put out fires and do all those things. No, they preempt those things by getting revelation from heaven of what the enemy's strategies are. They begin to move things forward because they can see what needs to be in place for the next season. That's not easy, and we have, that's probably our major area here right now, is helping our seven who are on the ground to just become more kingly in their operation and more governmental in their approach. And they're getting there. And we have every 2 weeks we have a 12 meeting in which there is a report that they bring, and we hold them accountable and we ask them questions, and it's like, well, how are you doing with this? How's this going? What's God saying? Show us, and then we have a report from each of the mountains so that we're accountable for what we're doing. We give a bench of 3 report, that actually shares, okay, this is what we feel God's saying. As we've stepped in, these are the things that God has shown us. Let's step in together. And then we always have an activation, or this is the plan, that we have an activation according to what we see God's doing. This week we went and engaged with scrolls that we had been given and we'd released, and those scrolls were to have declarations which would form a shield of protection over us. Because when we went into the realms of heaven, we saw having arrows, 4 arrows, firing out to establish where our ground would be, and then we saw declarations being made as arrows that would carry the frequency that would cause that invisible shield to be in place. And therefore each of the 7 mountains now, we encourage them to go and get, as we stepped in, to get the mandate for that scroll, and then begin to release the declarations which will operate on the different spheres so that we will be protected. Not just that we will be protected and therefore safe, but actually we will be protected to have a administrative base to advance, because then we'll have to fire out further arrows to go further into, to expand the territory, which is what you do. You have to have a firm base, establish the territory. And if you think of in Roman terms, they would set up what was called a castrapona, which is an administrative center in a territory that they'd conquered. They would make sure that the supply lines went back to Rome effectively, so that they would have continual supplies. And then when they'd established that and changed the culture of that area, because they absorbed people into their culture effectively, then they would then go and expand more. They wouldn't do what Napoleon did and went out and tried to attack on 2 fronts, or Hitler did. He went and tried to attack out on 2 fronts. The supply lines were cut and they basically weren't able to actually win the battles. So we have to make sure we're connected to heaven. That's our source. That's where we're going to get everything we need to do what we do, and we must have that heavenly supply line continually in place. That will enable us then to establish and to expand. But it'll take time. I know that because it's taken a lot more time here than I would have liked it to take, but we are stronger for it, and we have stronger relationship as a result of it, and we've learned to overcome a lot of things, and we're still in that journey, in that process. So
Wow,
yeah.
that's very good, Mike. Well, back one more question. I'll let you take over, Joe. Practically, like with the Big of 3, like stepping way back. I know you've talked about that process. Being from a monarchy over there in the UK, that enthronement, investiture, all of that stuff. Is that something that actually we need to do, and somebody like yourself that has a chancellor's seal needs to be involved, or how would that practically work out?
In a sense, there is a role that chancellors play in calling for benches to be established, and they can help in the process. But there isn't this sort of hierarchy that, oh, you have to have a chancellor to have a bench, and if you haven't got that, because that will be just setting up something old. In a sense, this is all about supporting, encouraging, releasing according to the blueprints we have. So yes, we're actually going to do this in 2 weeks' time. We're going to get all the seven and the different people who are on the mountains, all the benches that are on the mountains, and we're going to invest them with authority. So we're going to step into heaven. We're going to do that in a heavenly sense. So we're going to step into on all of the mountains. We're going to call for our angels, the angels of those mountains, to come. We're going to call for the blueprint of that to be released, and then we're going to call Jesus to invest them. So he is going to invest them with a crown and a mantle and a scepter and whatever weapons that he might have for them. And so we're going to do that. We'll do that together one evening. So we'll get all those sort of 20, 30 people together and begin to do that. Then what we'll do on the ground, we will do a physical outworking of that where we share with the wider body what we've done, and we will do that actually, and then we will lay hands on them, anoint them, and invest them so that people recognize that they have that authority here. So we outwork that in a practical way. Now, obviously, I carry authority to be able to do that because I'm part of the bench, and that's each bench. God invests you with the authority. It doesn't need somebody else to do it. If someone is able to come and be part of the process, that's great. I mean, it's just something which is a good thing, but it's not. It doesn't have to be that way. Otherwise we'd be stuck. Until we have to wait for so and so to come and all that stuff. I'm releasing authority for my mounting all the time, so I'm always issuing calls for benches, and when I recognize them, I just want to help and support. There's no system that sets up some empire. It's about supporting those and helping them fulfill their blueprints. It's having no authority over it. The only authority you have over your blueprint is God. And that's the authority that you operate in. And when you establish the blueprint, the only authority over the seven actually is God. You're under them as the support that releases them into their destiny. You're not sitting over them. I'm not saying there isn't accountability in a practical sense, but it's not this, oh well, we're over it, because that's just setting up a mountain the other way up. That's just what we're trying to demolish, having people on top of the mountains, ruling everybody. No, we are servant rulers. We are actually in the foundation that actually allows people to grow out of that foundation. So yeah, I wouldn't see any need for it. In a practical sense, if I'm in a place, when I was in Maryland, I did invest their bench of 3 with authority, which was great. It was a privilege to be involved because I've been involved with them from the beginning, and and it was great to be involved in that. But I have no ownership. I have an invested relationship in which I ongoingly want to support and encourage and help in any way I have. But there's no pyramid that we're forming. We're forming relational connections between people and areas that can establish areas of government, really. And we don't want to set up a hierarchy of that, which I know some people would want to do because that's what they're used to doing, but I'm not certainly going to get involved in that, that's for sure. And, yeah.
Well, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Okay.
So I can be friendly Archbishop Henry. I don't have to see him anymore. I try to get. I do have a couple of questions too. As you're describing Peter, as we're interacting, we talked about this some yesterday. Just this waiting period. For me personally, not speaking for Peter, but for me personally, it seems like maybe what the Lord's doing, even through the waiting and the grappling with it, is outworking some of the old system. Outworking some of the Egypt system. In me, in us, if you will, in the process. Some of that being, I feel bound by time. We're running out of time. We got to make something happen. Let's get moving. I'm speaking for myself there, and maybe that's just part of the process. Of waiting and grappling and allowing this to kind of organically form, if you will.
I would definitely say that that's the case. And we used to have a phrase, you can take someone out of Egypt, but you have to get Egypt out of them. And so definitely there is that understanding of, yes, we can look to establish a new governmental order, but we have to be a new governmental order. And that is the process where we have to embrace, hey, I'm thinking in an old way here. And it will happen. We will default, and then it will be, oh, why do we do that? Why do we think that? And the more you're aware of that, and the more you're willing to embrace that and be proactive about it. Hey, let's talk about how we think about this, or how do we think about this? How would we do this from a new or an old perspective? Talk, share, just dialogue around it to actually get and understand. That hits in something in me. I would want to do it this way. Why? And I've had to do that. It's like when we've had conflict situations, my reaction was, okay, we'll put them out of the church then. That's how it used to be. It's like, because it's like, well, that's what the Bible says, doesn't it? If they're doing this and this, and they don't repent, and you've done everything you possibly can to bring them into that place of relationship, and they won't do it, well, then you just have to let them go. And that, okay, there's a biblical precedent for that when there is sin of a certain nature and different things. But when we were faced with political spirit and religious spirit in operation and those things, you have to come in an opposite spirit. And I had to recognize that my mindsets and my thinking weren't right. Fortunately, the other two of the bench, they had a better perspective, and they were able to correct me, and I was willing to take that correction. So, well, okay, will you give the insight then? What should we do? And it was a totally different way. And so rather than dealing with it in a confrontational way, because the political spirit looks for an argument, we didn't argue. We made it clear. So we had to be clear where we were coming from and what our standpoint was. We made it clear, and we stood on it. And whenever someone wanted an argument, we just said, we refer you through the previous document. We refer you to our previous answer. We're not going to argue. This is what we believe. This is where we're going. This is why we're doing it, and we're not arguing about it. We're not justifying it. We're not going to, so we're not giving the enemy a chance to cause conflict, because we won't have any conflict. And as a result of that, God removed the person who was causing the conflict and took them somewhere else. And we were able to bless them and pray for them and release them and encourage them in where they went, because we just weren't going to get caught up in that old way of trying to, prove that we were right. We don't need to prove we were right. We just have to be obedient and follow God and do what God's told us to do. And actually along the way, we'll actually realize, no, that wasn't right, that wasn't right, and that wasn't right, but it was part of our journey, and now we realize something greater in progressive revelation. Just because we're doing something this way this year, maybe we won't necessarily do it next year. I know that causes people all sorts of problems because they like continuity and comfort zones. Well, if you're moving on a journey, you have to be willing to break camp all the time and move on. And in a spiritual sense, that means that revelation has to be ongoing and progressive. It can't be the same. So, and a good thing to do in those situations with people where you're establishing these type of things is to talk about it and say, let's look back over the last 4 or 5 years of our lives, and can we think about 5 things that we now think differently than we did then? And then look at 5 things we now think about, which may be something we think strongly about, but would we be willing to change them if God called us to? And you sort of start to give an opportunity to dialogue and bring these things out, and God will use those things. We did this, and where people wouldn't share in a large group, we broke down into groups of 3s and 4s, and we shared it in smaller groups where it was less intimidating, because some people don't like talking in a lot, even with a group of 12. Some people were like, I don't want to say, so I don't want to say, so we thought, okay, well, we'll get around that. We'll break down into smaller groups, and then we'll feedback what people have shared so that we all get a perspective. There are ways that you can create that culture and help each other understand where we are and where we're going, and it is a process that we have to be willing to change. I mean, that's the key. You don't become new overnight. It's a renewing of our minds to embrace a new way of thinking, and that new way of thinking will keep growing, and we'll keep changing if we keep following. But sacred cows do have to be slain sometimes. They just do, and some of them you have to find out, well, what are they? And it isn't until you recognize them that you realize, wow, I really held a strong opinion and view on that. Why? What's if anything caused you to get agitated over something of theology or doctrine or belief systems, then ask the question why. Because if it's an issue that we've invested something into, that we're going to fight over, then we have to be careful to recognize it. And we're not going to fight over things. We're going to come to a place of mutual agreement over the purposes of God. Hence, our bench of 3 will not do anything unless we're in total agreement. And we've encouraged our bench of 7 to do exactly the same. And a couple of times they were at an impasse. There was 3 of them who thought one thing and 3 of them who thought the other. And it was like over inviting someone to come and speak. Some 3 of them basically looked at the motive that they thought they saw and were like, well, actually, we're not sure that we really are keen on this. The others were like, oh, great, yeah, let's have them. And so they were at an impasse. There was only 6 of them at the time, so they didn't have a forecasting vote, if you like, in a sense, but we don't vote. But so they brought it to us. They brought it to the 3, and we adjudicated. We sought God over it, and we actually said, no, actually, we feel the right thing is not to invite that person, because we don't feel it's the right season, and we don't feel that we're in the place right now for that will be good. And so that was it. They accepted that. But we then encouraged them next time, make sure you look to seek God and engage. And if you have a difference of view, use that as an opportunity to grow and see, okay, are the 3 who have a different view from the other 3, which way did they get that view? Is it a gut feeling? Is it just, oh, well, I didn't really bother, I just sort of thought that would be a good idea? Or did they go and get revelation from heaven? And did they see it as part of our blueprint? And did they see a strategy that was part of where we were in this season? Because if they didn't, then they weren't acting governmentally. So everything's an opportunity of learning. It's all an opportunity of growth, of learning, and even the mistakes. We give people permission to have a go and make mistakes, because that's the way you learn. We don't want this perfectionist thing that we won't do anything until absolutely everything's ready. We've had this recently with our mountains, because some people were like, well, I don't think these people are ready yet. I said, well, how are they going to get ready unless you equip them? And the best way of equipping them is doing it on the job. So if you know they're called, it doesn't really matter whether you think they're ready. It's being called which is the issue, because we all can learn when we accept the call. The old way is, well, let's make sure everything is in the right place and totally ready, then we'll do something. And that's why we don't do an awful lot. Because with God, every step of faith is one which stretches us to go beyond what we're actually capable of doing in the natural. So it's always going to be a stretch, but that's okay. And in that stretch, we will learn many things, but it's okay. And that's why the culture of honor gives people the permission to mess up, and they're not going to be punished. they're going to be encouraged to learn and to grow through the experiences that they have, you know. And that's why we have accountability and feedback sessions, because we talk about, well, how did you make that decision? And okay, well, where were you coming from when that happened? And it helps us learn. You know, evaluation is always a good thing. If people do not fear being punished, you know, that's what the enemy will always bring into every dynamic. Fear. You always use fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of, you know, not being liked. You know, fear of, or if I say that, I'll feel stupid. Or, you know, fear of getting it wrong. Fear of failing. You know, so many fears that the enemy will use to hamstring us and keep us from going into the purposes of God. And we've got to make sure that perfect love casts out fear. So we have to have an environment of love. You know, that has to be the environment that all relationships are formed in, love. You know, and a practical choice to love each other, forgive each other, bless each other. You know, make sure that we maintain relationship with each other. You know, don't allow fences to form and offense and defense to take place. You have to work at it. You know, it's not easy. You know, it isn't.
Right.
You know, but
Mike, I mean, there's probably maybe 2 or 3 questions here, so allow me a minute to develop this. But in brief, governing, ruling, reigning, reestablishing our rightful territory and taking dominion of the planet back from the enemy. So let's start kind of big picture and work back to kind of where we are personally. We've been seeing some things. I've seen some things. Peter has. You perceived some things about ruling spirits in this territory when you were flying in back in July. You know, we're starting to see some pictures of that. We're starting to see some, you know, perceive the resources that are on our side. You know, so we're starting to see kind of the target, if you will, out in the distance of what needs to come down. And so the feeling is, well, there it is. So it's how do we do it and when do we do it? And the default is do it now, you know. And I think there's still a good bit of caution and self-restraint because, you know, when we're not at that level, if we go into that level, we get in trouble, you know, if you will. But I think that's continuing to form, you know, the clarity of kind of the ruling or reigning spirits, if you will, that need to be taken down. So beginning to see it, I think, again, I'm repeating myself, it creates we got to do something, what and when. Back down to where we are now, and it's, like you said at the very beginning, it's ruling in our own life, reigning in our own life, you know, dealing with the ruling spirits in our own life, and then our marriages and family, etc. And I still felt like I hadn't gotten out of first grade, you know, and yet seeing, and I mean that, I mean, I'm just being very honest, and seeing that, and I know there's that tension that we've talked about it before of, you know, you get started somewhere along the journey. You don't wait till you fully get it all together, so to speak. You know, it's all part of the process. But I think for me, and maybe for some of us collectively, you know, here locally, that feels like what the dynamic is. Just that waiting patiently, like you said, loving one another, conversing, focusing, you know, resisting the temptation to move too quickly and yet wanting to, and then beginning to see some of what needs to be taken down. I don't know if I really asked a question as much as thank you for listening. But I mean, I'm sure, well, that's normative. I mean, that you've seen this kind of stuff a lot. You've seen a lot of these things happen. I mean, what if that's an even close to accurate description, Peter? You know, from your perspective, you know, how would you comment on that, Mike?
Right. Well,
Words of
in sort of looking to establish government and looking to establish what is the dominion that God has given, then the starting place is the blueprint, because that's what you're mandated and authorized to do. So anything that you see that's not in line with the blueprint, you're not responsible for, even if you see it, unless God gives you personal responsibility to do something, which He can mandate you to do something as an individual, no problem. That might be part of your own mountains that you get to administer. But if you're operating together as a group, the key is, if you're looking at, we want an open heaven, we want a city of refuge or an area here where the government of God is in operation, where we want to see dominion, we want to see heaven's law operating on earth, we want to live under a totally different governmental system, all those things, you have to start where you start. And that means, as you say, starting with me. Because if you think of, okay, there is me, and there is the community I'm living in, and I look at this from Isaiah 6. Oh, woe is me, I am a man of unclean lips, and I live amongst the people of unclean lips. There was a recognition that, hey, I am not perfect, and I live amongst a whole community here that's not perfect. But there was a willingness to embrace the coal from the altar. And then there was, hey, here am I, send me. Which is a complete turnaround from, oh, woe is me, I'm undone, I'm unraveled, to here am I, send me. And so there is the fact of, if you recognize there is cultural issues, whether you call them principalities or powers or rulers or forces of wickedness, all those things, then I would look at how that is affecting my life initially, because I can try and get rid of them, but if I'm still operating in it, I will just give them the authority to come back. Now, you can look at that and think, well, what good can I do? I'm just one person. But you have a multiplied effect.
Right.
So when one of you is working, that's fine. You can put 1,000 to flight. But when two come together in agreement, there's 10,000. There's a 10-fold increase. When three come together, there is a 100-fold increase, because it's exponential. So when you can see a multiplied effect in your community or in your region as a 10-fold exponential effect that you can have over your community. So it takes a level of authority which can be multiplied out. So, you know, if you have 100,000 people in your community, you actually only need how many to deal with 100,000? If you work it out, you only need 3, because basically 10, 100, 1,000. It's like, you know, then you multiply it out, you know. So each sphere of government that you have is not just, oh, me and my small corner and I can only do this little bit. Once I come into agreement with the purposes of God and the mandates that we have, then you can see a huge change take place as a result of what you do. Now, along the way, there are things that we've learnt from the past which are helpful. If you're going to deal with recognizing those things that are in the atmosphere of the earth, affecting culture and reaffirming negative cultures in a city, I mean, you know, you have different cities that have different traits, different issues that are going on, which you recognize. You know, you obviously firstly recognize it in you to make sure that you're not doing it. Then as a group, you begin to realize, look, we must not operate under that influence. You know, we operate under heaven, we don't operate under the atmosphere. It's helpful to know what legal rights that the enemy has, and that is history. You know, so spiritual mapping, you know, which went, you know, in the 80s, and you had the transformation video and you all that stuff. You know, I'm not opposed to drawing from history to understand what goes on in an area. You know, so there may be research that's already been done about your area, which will give you some insight and some clues when you come to dealing with it judicially. I've got no issue with that. Now, God can give you revelation direct, and if he shows you, yes, there's this ruling power, then you can take it into the court. But you've got to be operating. You know, I wouldn't do that on my own. You know, I would be doing that corporately together in agreement to deal with that level of spiritual influence. So there are things we have learned. They just never learned to take the information that they had and operate it in heaven above that level of authority. You can't do it below. You have to do it above. So even when you're dealing with your own life, when you step into the realms of heaven, you step in and you're immediately righteous, and therefore you can have authority over those things in your life to be separated from them. Again, operating judicially, dealing with it in our own lives, where we've cooperated with something, we've given authority for it, we give it power over us, we remove that by renouncing that, repenting, and removing the power over us. So everything you do to change something has to be done in the heavens initially. Once you've then are working on yourself there and you've established government there, then you can begin to deal with those things that are in the atmosphere of the earth. Then you deal with them in a different way, because now you're above them. You're looking down from a different perspective on them. When you look up onto a perspective, they're over you, and it can feel heavy. It's like, oh wow, I'm under this. When you're over it, you look down on it, and it looks different, and you're higher, and so it even looks smaller than it really is, because you're coming from a higher perspective. You know, particularly when you're engaging with the four faces of God and you see it from the eagle perspective or the ox perspective, you see the prophetic perspective and the apostolic perspective to it, and then you begin to order and deal with it. Now, once you have dealt with the legal rights for it to be there, then you can then deal with it. You can't deal with it with legal rights. Just because we're in the heavens doesn't mean we have a legal right. We have to know our authority, and to know our authority, we have to have dealt judicially. So we use the court system. We deal with the accusations. We deal with the legal rights, whether there be blood covenants, whether there be things in the ground, whether the historical things that have happened that have given authority to the enemy generationally. That revelation can come by research. It can come by revelation. And it can come when you deal with the accusations and demand to hear them. You can get the accusations. You can lie bust Atlanta, you know, lie bust your area. Actually, ask God to give you the information that actually has caused certain things to be in place generationally. You know, and God will. You know, there are a whole toolbox we got to be able to find out these things. Then it's a matter of, okay, we've dealt with this judicially. We make sure that we're not going to operate under this again together as a group, corporately and individually. Then we can assign angels to deal the work. It's like, I'm not going to go into the atmosphere of the earth and try and clear out the rulers and powers of forces. It's not my role. I have others I can assign to do that. Right. So, you know, just with Daniel's praying, there's an angel assigned to take him a message, and yet it took 21 days for the angel to get here because there's a battle going on in the atmosphere. Eventually, God sends another angel, bigger one, more authority, and they overcome, and then the messenger is released and he comes through with the message. So we need to assign those to the atmosphere to deal with that. So we need to know, what are our territorial spirits? You know, what is the angel over Atlanta? You know, what we need to know. We need to engage with him or her so that we can then cooperate in the dealing with that principality, because that principality is just the name of the area, the territory. The demon or fallen angel that's operating there isn't a principality, it's someone who's operating in that area. So like the Principality of Monaco is the area where the rulership of that thing is from. So we just need to identify that, and we assign the right angelic force to deal with it. And then we stand guard. We work with the watchman angels to ensure that once we've established that dome of protection, if you like, then it's not going to be infiltrated or affected. We have to be on guard, and you get people who are very sensitive to stuff in the spiritual realm. So, we have one who's in our bench of 7. The other 6 are always saying, "Oh, you're always negative. Why are you always bringing us negative stuff?" But he's seeing the strategies of the enemy. So he's warning us. Now, God gives some people the ability to do that. Now, you obviously have to keep them not becoming doom and gloom, and because they tend to see, oh no, well, this is going to happen, and that. No, we see it so we can stop it happening. So we had one last week. A guy saw something. He saw that the enemy was going to send somebody. This was going to be an assassin that was going to come in that looked good, but they then assassinated people. So it's like, okay, right, the 7 of you are now responsible to put a shield up, to make the declarations, to destroy the enemy's plan, to make sure that that assassin will not get through, and that he will not come and affect us. So we don't have to think, oh no, how are we going to deal with this when he comes? No, we stop it happening, because we can see ahead, and therefore we can bring government into it and stop it. Now, some people will have that gift that God will use them in that way. You don't want too many of them. You want most people who are looking into, okay, what is the strategy that God's given us? But it is helpful for those who can see and reveal ahead of time some of what the enemy is planning to do. So, in a sense, then that's how you deal with it, and it'll be an ongoing process. It'll be an ongoing process. I mean, you're not going to deal with every ruling spirit and principality thing and a spiritual host of wickedness over in Atlanta in a day. Right. You'll have to do multiple court cases. You may well then need to go and present a case before the Galactic Council for the boundary stones to be shifted and for authority and judgment to be made in your favor when it's the season of judgment, or justice to be brought into the area when it's the season of justice, or grace or mercy. And we have to have the cases put together to take there to do. And that's what I'm seeing at the moment. This is why we have to establish government, so that we can take the authority that we have been given to the Galactic Council and present a case. I'm not going to walk before the Galactic Council and say, oh, would you pour out some grace over us, please? I have to go with the prophetic word, with the blueprint, with God's redemptive purpose for our area, with the vision for the city of refuge. I have to go and present a case. We have authority here. We're establishing this. We call you to put boundary stones on our behalf, and we call for judgment to be made in our favor so that we can exercise this and do this. And and I'm not saying we're going to get there and do this. I'm still a learner and an amateur. I'm just starting to see how, and I know the Galactic Council starts to sit on the 28th of February. So for me, I've been fasting this month to really engage with the 12 houses, to really get some insight, because I want to know what areas of judgment does my sphere of government need to be agreed and authorized by the Galactic Council. Now, I'm gonna do my best to try and come up with a good case that I can take, and that will be prophetic history. It will be what I've seen in what was, so that I can see that come into what is. I will bring prophetic future, so that I can see this is what we're called, and I will try and think, okay, I need to put a case together. And you don't put a case together in law, quickly. You have to have it line by line, built on the precepts of God, you know, using the statutes of God, establishing the laws of God so that you can release the ordinances of God. And then that will then begin to change things. But we're learning, you know,
Yeah.
God is not going to look down and say, well, you're all a, you know, bunch of wasters because you're not doing it quick enough. He knows that we're on a journey. So he's not going to expect us to engage the Galactic Council when we've never engaged the Court of Accusation. I mean, we have to start,
Right.
you know, learning. Once we've learned to put a case before the Court of Accusation, once we've learned to go before the Chancellor's Court, or once we've learned to go in the Angelic Court, we'll start to appreciate more of the practical things, the protocols that we need to put in place. You know.
So here's what I'm drawing. So one of the recent visions that we've seen is actually it was a ruling spirit over our city, and it was viewed from far above, looking down on that ruling spirit, and did see a release of light from heaven that caused that spirit to go away. So I'm at the time, the way that processed or set in my mind was, oh, that was a cool experience. Now I'm looking at it, quite frankly, during our discussion as a maybe perhaps, well, that was probably a prophetic revelation of what's going to happen in the future. So sounds like from there, perhaps where we need to go is, what is that root? How did it get, you know, spiritual history, spiritual mapping, really just trying to determine what that actually is. That's the process. And then bring that back to the personal and even the smaller group is, how does that affect my life personally? How do I get free from that personally? And what about us as a group? Starting there, and then and then the trust that the Lord will reveal kind of strategies from that point, you know, versus, hey, it's up on the hill and now we just charge the hill with a sharp stick, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely right. You know, some of what we see, it's not to say that you've not released light, but what you do is that builds and builds and builds, so that as you continue to outwork the process, that is an ongoing progressive thing. And yes, when the light is increased to such a measure, then darkness won't be able to stay in the light. But you can have light which is a laser, you can have light which is a huge searchlight, you can have light which comes from the sun. You know, it's all different in terms of the strength of it, the power of it, the effect of it, depending on what its source is. So yeah, outwork that and continue to work through the process, absolutely. And you know, in it all, it's just ensuring that you keep within the governmental spheres that you've been given. That's the key, making sure that you know that you have the authorization to outwork this and to administrate it. And things will grow, things will develop. You know, you will get more authority. You know, as you rise into the realms of heaven and you go from lordship to kingship, you will be able to legislate. You'll be able to make laws that then you have established will set the boundaries for what the enemy can't do. And you will begin to take the ground, and you will begin to exercise authority over the ground. You know, but that will come as you mature. You know, we're all just learning. You know, this is a maturing process of coming into sonship as mature sons. I'm a son, but I'm not mature. You know, I'm still growing and maturing and understanding and, in a sense, becoming purified in the process. But it will happen. You know, we will establish these cities of refuge, and we will clear the atmosphere, and we will be able to have heaven on earth in those areas, and we will then use those areas to expand and join up with other areas to actually take back the atmosphere of the earth. You know, and once we've taken back the atmosphere of the earth fully, then we will see the river of life, which is dammed up in the area in the atmosphere of the earth called nirvana, it will be released. And that whole atmosphere of the earth, which is now completely desolate, mostly, will be restored. Because Adam was given that to enable him to administer the whole planet. So there'll be a restoration of that, with our ability to encompass the planet with the glory of God, because the glory of God will cover the earth. And that's where it will be covered, because we will be operating as princes of the power of the air. Just Satan just took that role because he had access to it. We will operate there, because we're called to be kings, princes, nobles. Proverbs chapter 8. Wisdom teaches us to function and to bring government as kings, princes, nobles. And there's different levels of authority depending on maturity. So, a lot of the things that God's done in the past to bring revelation of these things is not wasted. We just get to do it from a heavenly perspective rather than purely from an earthly one. And that is the difference. The order of Melchizedek is a royal priesthood that operates beyond the veil. And that's where the kingdom needs to be established. And we will learn as we go, and we'll grow in it. And there is so much mysteries hidden in darkness for us to find. And some of those things have never, ever, ever been released before. There are some scrolls which are sealed up, Daniel's scrolls, sealed up, and now they've been unsealed, which is stuff which has been seen before. There are things in the darkness, which, because darkness isn't bad, this is the darkness that God's in, and the dark cloud. There are hidden mysteries which have never ever been revealed. So there are sources of power and energy and light and propulsion which have never ever been revealed, but they're there for us to come into. I've seen some of them in essence. I haven't seen the details, but I've seen that there are things that are going to be released which right now we have got no imagination or thought about. Therefore, you can't prepare for them until they're revealed. And once they're revealed, everything changes. And seasons will change dramatically as new things get released. Those mysteries which are hidden for us are revealed, and then we begin to function totally differently. And I think part of the problem is we've got nothing to go on. We've only got the history to look back at. We haven't got what it will be. Now, someone like Ian Clayton says, he's been to 2057, everything was different, but we're still there. I think Bob Jones prophesied up to 2060, his 100-year prophecy. He saw some things. I'm not saying everything he interpreted was as it will be, because he only had the revelation that he had, but he saw it. And I think we're going to come into that, and it will totally change everything. And this is where we just, can you imagine if a power source was released that enabled you to draw from the air that which would release the power to power your whole area with no grid? Well, that would change everything overnight. It would change everything if you could draw from the magnetic field of the earth to power everything you needed to accomplish everything you needed to do in a city of refuge, and you needed no grid system or anything else. That would change dramatically the shift, because that knowledge would change things. And there are lots of things like that which will be revealed, which will change things dramatically. We just can't imagine what it will be like. So we have to follow the process through, keep seeking after the revelation and coming into our position in governorship as sons, and then we will get to administer some of those things. There are things to be discovered in one of the chancellor's houses which just are amazing. As I've been there this week, I'm sort of like excited by it, because I've seen the principle of it and how it can work, and it's like, wow. Because we all work on normalcy. Everything's basically much the same, and we just think everything's going to be the same, but maybe a little bit different. But if you went back 200 years and you brought someone from 1800 to today, they would be absolutely, completely fried because they would have no grid for what they see or saw. You know, they had steam power, which was all they had, virtually. Now, they're like, what? You can get signals through the air that gives you a picture on a screen? What? You can speak to someone in the other part of the world? How? You had to send a boat to take messages to Australia. It's like, now I can talk to someone in Australia in real time. You know, we have a orbit in system that goes around the Earth in a space station. I mean, what would someone even think of that? No understanding whatsoever. Just 200 years of fairly sort of progressive change. What if 200 years worth of change was released in a day? And so these are some of the things that they just will begin to expand our perception and understanding, because we've got to dream big. You know, we have to be those that have the mind of Christ. It's not limited by being earthbound. And some of that, you know, I think I listened to a message by Ian Clayton, and a few people have asked me about it, of being tethered to the earth. You know, we must be free from the negative frequencies that hold us back and keep us into normalcy, because it will only be what it's always been. No, it won't only be what it's always been. When we engage in what will be out of what was, and things will be as it was from the beginning, and God's original intention will be released, which will change everything, absolutely everything. You know, so we're in for an exciting journey. But let's face it, we have a generation at least. Even on those figures, we have a generation to prepare, so we don't have to be over concerned or rush ahead or try and do things out of sequence, or just because we see it, we can learn to get the strategy from heaven and learn to administrate as good sons, and we will see our level of authority will begin to increase and increase and increase and increase, because there is no end to the increase of his government, which means there will be no end to my increase of government in my role as a son. So, you know, I'm looking forward to ruling over a galaxy. You know, why not? Or a dimension. Why not? I'm the joint heir with Christ. He created everything. Why wouldn't I be creative and release those things as a son of God? Now, the potential and things, you know, you can let your mind sort of like, what will that be? But you know, I've been and seen some of it, and I know it is coming. It's just like we have ages to come. You know, it's not just the age to come, it's the revelation of the ages to come. There are different things that are going to take place in the future, but we've got to get this planet back into its rightful place in the center of God's purposes, and that's where it is. God intended mankind to be at the center of his redemptive, creative purpose for the whole of the order, which we only see a tiny fraction of. That's our destiny. That's why Satan rebelled, because he saw in the Firestones what our destiny was as sons of God in the whole of the created dimensional realms, and he rebelled and led a rebellion of a third of the angels. You know, hence there's a lot of work in restoring and bringing back the government of God into those spheres, but that's what we're called to do. So all good fun. Anyway.